Hi, I'm Lorian, and today I'm going to show you how to create a simple find a button map in Game Maker. When you're making a map or a game in Game Maker, usually you will need a way to store information of how something is changing in your map for specific players or for all players. One thing that you will probably need to do for most maps, and you definitely need for find a button maps, is to create properties. Properties are like variables in programming. They are things that can hold information for you. They can hold information for a specific player or for a global. Global means something that affects your entire map and all players. What are the two things that you need the game to keep track of when you are making a find a button map? One is the time. You want to know how long the player has been trying to find the buttons for. And the other one is how many buttons the player has found so far. So let's create these two properties. First, let's create a property called buttons. This property will hold the information of how many buttons the player has found so far when they're playing your map. Okay, to create a property, go into your menu, click Properties, and then click Add Property. Name your new property. And when you create anything in Game Maker that you can name, make sure to always call it something that makes sense and is easy to remember. It will make your life a lot easier. Now, you need to choose the property type. Properties can hold different kinds of information. They can hold text, they can hold location and time, and so on. I won't go into details on the property types. The buttons property that you are creating needs to be a type that can hold a number. So let's select number as the property type. Okay, now your property has been created. You can edit it now. One thing that you can do, and usually you should remember to do for any maps, is to set the default value of the property. Now for the find button maps, you want the default value for the number of buttons to be 0, the number of buttons found to be 0. This is not always needed for every map. Like if the default value is 0, depending on what you want to do with your property, you don't need to set it to 0. But I'm showing you for future reference in case you never need to change that. I also recommend always setting a default value. There are other things that you can do, that you can change, but you don't have to for a simple find a button map, like how long this property lasts in duration, and if it is persistent or not. And persistent means that if a player leaves your map and when they come back, the property will not reset. It will remember the previous value. I recommend you don't start using those options until you understand all the basics of how things work in Game Maker. Okay, so for now, just set the default value to 0 and that's it. Your property is ready to go. Now let's create the other property that we need, the timer. So the same thing, click Add Property, name your new property. Let's name it Player Timer. Select the property type as date and time. Timer. Select the property time as timer. Again, it starts at 0, so let's write 0 minutes here. I like to set a default value. The reason for that is that sometimes at some point in the future, you may need to check if that property equals 0 for some reason, depending on how you create your map. So that's why I always like to set the default value. And that's it. That's all you need. Now, how do we make this property that we just created, this buttons property that we just created, increase by 1 every time the player finds a button? Let's configure our buttons. Here I'll give you an example for a 3-button map. You can change this wherever you want. I have all my buttons here. Let's pretend they are hidden all over my map. Right now, if I click one of them, let's change it to play mode. Nothing happens because I didn't configure them yet. Go into your menu and click regions. Right now I only have one region that is global, but if you have more, make sure to know where your button is located in your map. So let's select the region, click events, and then player block interact. Click create region event, and now this is going to be your first button. It is not set yet. The game doesn't know where your button is yet. If you right click this, and then click block and click select block, the game will prompt you to right click a block to select it. Let's right click the first button. And that's it. Now the game knows where your button is. For find a button, let's go back and change something else. Let's go back to the button that we just configured and set something else. Now right click it again, and I'll change the execution mode to once per player and block. We don't want the player to be able to press the same button over and over again, so remember to change the execution mode for a find a button map. Okay, now you have to do this for all the buttons. Okay, create the button, right click it, everything that we just did right here, you'll need to do it for all of the buttons. Okay, so now that the button exists, but it's not doing anything, right? So let's add some actions. Remember the buttons property that we created? We want it to increase by 1 when someone presses a button, right? So I'm gonna show you something as an example, but that's not how we're gonna set this button at the end. Now, if I go to the region where the button is located, or events, player block, interact, here's our button again. I'm gonna left click it this time to add an action to it. I'll click add action and then change property. This action does exactly what it says. It changes a property when someone interacts with this specific block. I'm gonna set it to change the property buttons for holder type player, because we only want to change it for the player that is pressing the button. I'm gonna set the operator to add, and I'm gonna set the value to 1. What does this mean? When someone interacts with this button, 1 value will be added to the property that we call buttons, okay, for the player. Now this will work, but imagine that you have like 20 buttons. Do you really want to have to create an action for each button? That's too much work, especially if you want other actions to happen, like you want it to display on screen how many buttons have been found or any other action. You'll have to do the same thing over and over again. You don't have to do that. That's what functions are for. So remember I said this was an example. I'm gonna delete this. We're gonna do it a different way. So I'm gonna shift click to remove this. So if you were following along and you added it to shift click to remove that change property, and now our button's gone back to having 0 actions. Let's create a function. That's much better. Oh, that was an example. Let's create a function from scratch. Let's create a function and let's name it button counter. Functions are like a list of commands that you can call whenever you want those commands to happen. We want a list of commands that will run when we press a button, right? What do we want it to happen when we press a button? First, we want it to add 1 to the button's property, like I showed you before. Let's do the same thing. Change property of the property buttons, holder type player. Let's make it add 1. So add 1 to the buttons property for the player. That's our first action. That's our first in our list of actions. That's our first, but what else do we want? We want the number of buttons that have been found to display on screen. Remember that the buttons property holds a number. We can use that. Let me show you something. If I go back to properties and click buttons, you'll see here that there is an option called placeholders. Placeholders are like strings of text that for the information that the property holds. So in this case, we want the placeholder for the player, right? So we have different placeholders. In this case, we want the placeholder for the player. For find a button, you care about the value for a specific player. See this one? Memorize this or write it down, or just take a picture. I don't know. You'll soon get used to it. You won't have to memorize it. But placeholders always follow the same pattern. %, p underscore, the property name underscore player %. Now let's go back to the function. Let's add a second action. Come back here. Let's add a second action. Let's add a display title action. For the title, let's say button found. For the subtitle, let's use the placeholder. Remember the placeholder? It was p underscore %, p underscore variable name, which was buttons underscore player %. So here for mine, I have 3 buttons. So let's say you want the display title to say like 1 out of 3, or like how many buttons have been found with respect to how many are left. So this here will become the number of buttons found. This placeholder here, we want it to say like 1/3, 1 out of 3, or if you have 10 buttons, 1 out of 10, whatever. But we want this to say that like number of buttons found / the total number of buttons that you have in your map. See this right here? Placeholder / total number of buttons. And this here will control how long the title remains on screen for. Let's make it stay for 40 ticks. 20 ticks is 1 second. Now let's test it. Let's add this function that we just created to our button. Go back to your region, to events, player block interact, left click your button, and add an action. You're gonna add an action called call function. We wanted to call that function that we just created, button underscore counter. So now when someone presses this button, it will call that function. Let's see if it works. It's in play mode. Button found. 1 out of 3. Now test it to make sure, like if the player presses it again, it won't show again like 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3. We don't want that to happen. That's why I told you that you will need to change the execution mode for once per block per player. Now what else do we want? We need a way to end the game, right? We need to check if the player has found our buttons. How? Let's go back to the function and add an action. A conditional. A conditional checks if something is true, and if it is, it executes an action. Let's make a conditional. Let's add a condition that if the property buttons for the player equals 3, or however many buttons you have on your map, that's the condition. Go back, go to if actions. If that is true, what will happen? If that is true, it will, what do we want it to happen first? We want the timer to stop, right? If all the buttons have been found. So let's say change property, player timer for the player. Let's make it stop. And you don't need the value. But player timer for the player stop. That's the first thing we want it to happen if the condition that if all the buttons have been found is true. What else? Let's make the game wait a couple of seconds after that. Like 40 ticks is 2 seconds. And then display a title that says congratulations, and a subtitles that says all buttons have been found. And let's make it stay on screen for 40 ticks. So title, congratulations, subtitle, all buttons have been found. Let's make it stay on screen for 40 ticks. And that's another action that we added inside our conditional, okay, in the if actions. What else do you want it to happen? Do you want anything else to happen? Okay, I think that's fine for now. So let's test it. Let's configure the other two buttons, or however many buttons you have, so we can test if it works. I'm gonna go to set the second button. I'm gonna go to regions again, and I'm gonna go to events, player block interact, create a region event, right click it, select block, and then right click the block. I'm gonna do it for the other one as well. Create a region event, right click it, go to block, select block, and I'm gonna select this one. Now I have all three buttons. Let's go to the second button, add the button counter function to it, and let's go to the third button and add the button counter function to it. Okay, so now all three buttons are done. Let's test this. Button found 1 out of 3. Button found 2 out of 3. Button found 3 out of 3. Congratulations, all buttons have been found. Yes. Now, did you notice that I added an action to the function that makes the timer stop, but I never added anything that makes the timer start? Well, we need to add that. Let's make a start button. We will need another button to start the timer. I put it here in this little start room that I just built. I'm gonna show you something that that is optional. Like, you don't need a start room. You could just put the start button inside your main map. But I'm gonna show you something that is optional. So I'm gonna create a region for this start room. First, type //1 in chat to get your word edit one. Now, to create a new region, left click one corner of the region and right click the opposite corner of the region. You will see that the first and second positions will show in chat. Now go to menu, regions, create region. I'm gonna create a region called start_room, and I'm gonna create a button for this specific region. So events, player block interact, create region event. I'm gonna right click this, and I'm gonna click block. I'm gonna click select block, and I'm gonna select this button, which will be our start button. Remember that I told you that you need to make it so that the execution mode says once per player and block. So I just right click the button again and change the execution mode, okay? So you don't have this just to create a new region, but if you have a lot of different regions, like areas in your map, it's easier if you just make a few different regions for each of them. Just make sure that you always put the button inside the correct region, like we did right here, like in the correct region. Okay, don't put them all in global. It's better if you separate them by region, especially if you have a lot of buttons. Now let's make this button show a scoreboard with the timer when we press it. First, we need to create a scoreboard. Go to scoreboards in the menu, create scoreboard. Let's name it timer. Now, for line 1 of our scoreboard, let's make it say the title of your map. I'm gonna say find a button map, find a button example as the title. And for line 2, remember, you can customize this however you want, but let's make it show the placeholder value for the player timer. Remember the placeholders? Let's write time $P underscore player timer underscore player %sign. Now, okay, so this is our scoreboard. You can add more stuff if you want. Now let's go back to our menu in the start room. Oh, to the start room in the menu. Left click the button and add an action. Add a change scoreboard action. So the scoreboard will change and show it on screen. So select the scoreboard that you just created here. Then go back and let's add another action. Add a change property action that will change your player timer property for the player by making it start. You don't need a value. And that's it. Let's test it. Play mode. There you go. You see on the right side, it says find a button example, and it's now showing the time. There you go. You now have a functional find a button map. Let's test it. Let's click all the buttons to see. Button found, 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3. Congratulations, all buttons have been found and the timer has stopped. Everything works. Now let me show you something else just to make your map prettier. You could end there, okay, you don't need to do this, but you can change the colors of any text that shows on your screen. I'm gonna show you how to do it for the scoreboard, but this works for the display title action as well. Let's go back to the scoreboard. Remember, this is just extra. And let's change the first line. Let's say you want the first line to be in blue and bold. You need the color codes for that. I'll add a link that has color codes for Minecraft, but for blue it is %B, and for bold it is %O. And let's write again. So you will have to add these codes in front of your text every time you want to change the color or make it bold, italics, or anything like that, okay? So let's rewrite this. I wrote the codes there, and let's say find a button example. You see, now the find a button example. Oh, I made it italics. Sorry, let's make it. So for italics, it's %O. Let's make it bold. I want to make it bold. %L. Find a button example. There you go. Now it's bold. Now you can do this for any text that displays in your map. Check the color codes if you want something different. Like I showed, you can also make it italics instead of bold, or both. And there you go. Another extra thing, if you want, let's say, for the player to be teleported back to the start room after they find all the buttons, we can add a teleport in our function. First, let me go stand in the start room. It will make sense soon why I'm doing this. Now, let's go back to our function. Inside a conditional that should run after the player finds all buttons, let's add an if action. After displays title, congratulations, let's make it wait for 40 ticks, that is 2 seconds. And then after it waits, let's make it teleport the player to a location that is our current location. And that's why I came back in here to the start room, so that I can make my current location the one I want. And so that's why I said it makes sense. Okay, so now let's test it. So let me just repeat that if it was too fast. I just added a wait so it doesn't, like, the teleport and the display title don't happen at the same time. We want the display title to show first, like congratulations. You could also make it show after the teleport. The order, you choose the order. But let's make the display title show first, and then make the game wait a couple of seconds, and then we added the teleport action, okay? So let's test it. So I've started the timer. Button found, button found, button found. And there you go. Another extra thing, let's say your start room is far away from your map for main map, and you can also make this start button teleport the player to wherever you want. Let's make it so the start button will teleport the player here after they press it. So let's go back to our region, our start room region, events, player block interact, left click it. We have the other actions here that we already have set. Let's add another action. Let's add a teleport action that teleports the player to my current location. That's why I walked here. So after we press the start button, it should teleport the player to your main region, to your main map or wherever you want. And that's it. That's done. Remember that I told you that properties can hold location. So when I added this event here, teleport event, you had other options. You didn't have to use current location. You could make it teleport to a location that is set by a property. So in cases like this, like in Find a Button maps, you don't need to create that. You don't need to create a property that holds a location so you can make it teleport to that location. You can just set it to your current location. Just have to walk there wherever you want to set it. But if you want, you can also just create a property that holds a location, and then when you add a teleport action, you make it teleport to that property. It is useful in case like when you change your functions a lot, you can end up like losing the location that you want. So setting a property makes sure that information stays safe, so you don't have to keep setting over and over again if you delete it, you know. But that you don't need to do that for a Find a Button map. You can just do it how I showed you. Just set it to the current location and it should work as well. And that's the end of our tutorial. Let's do it again. For a final test, you see the timer has started. I've been teleported here. Button found 1 out of 3. Remember, you can also change the color of this text that says button found with the codes, with the color codes. So congratulations, all buttons have been found and I've been teleported back to the start room. And that's it. I hope this helps. I hope this helps you create your Find a Button map, and also maybe this will help you understand the basics of how Game Maker works and help you with other maps as well.